Okay, this will be the third and final video that I'm going to do about, or pertaining to topic two homework. And this, what I'm going to kind of focus on these conversions. As you can see, we have a bunch of converting units and of measures and money and all sorts of things. So I don't want to do one of each of these, but what I'm going to try to do is start off here with just a pretty basic one, and then try to go ahead and give you a generic approach to try. Um, because regardless of the conversion, we're going to have some sort of conversion equation, which I'll show you here in this next example. And then from there, we can go ahead and derive the solution we're looking for. So if I would just go ahead and pick this one here, I guess I already have one up there, but anyway, so we're going to be converting these measures here from yards to feet and inches to feet, and sometimes this can get confusing. But again, what I want to try to show you is one way of doing this. It's a generic approach. Now, I am going to get into an alternative, which is really the same thing. However, the way the problem is worded that you're going to get coming up, you're going to find that, again, both of these methods actually produce the same solution. So with that said, let me get into my annotation here. And since we're going from yards to feet here, what we want to do is get a conversion equation here. And so what do you want to do is kind of start with that. We know that 1 yard, and I apologize for the speed at which I write here, but I do have this handicap of using my mouse. So I'll try to be legible, but still, not take forever. Okay. Now we want to end up with 7 yards, right? We want to know what 7 yards is. So since this is an equation, what I do to one side, I'll just do to the other. So, I'm just going to add here, I'm going to multiply both sides by 7. And the reason for doing that is, right, I want to know what 7 yards is. So once I have that equation, all I need to do is perform the operation here. And sometimes we're going to see that we might need to do division or perform division in order to get with what we want. But I'll show you that here in a second. So if I just multiply here, obviously I'm going to get 7 yards, right, is equal to 21 feet. Okay. So pretty straightforward. Okay. Now, notice down here, this one's a little bit different. I'm going from inches to feet. So to make things a little bit easier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this as 12 inches equals 1 foot. All right. So once I do that, and the only reason I did that is just, I can flip this around because it's an equal sign. It's oriented like this, just to, I guess, alleviate the confusion. Now, again, what I want to get to over here is 48. Now, some of you may be able to look at this and say, hey, all I have to do is multiply both sides by 4. But let's say we just didn't have an easy number, like, what if this was a 15 or a 17 or something like that? Because, I think you probably can see now, at least that I mentioned it, that 4 times 12 would be equal to 48. Okay. And so then I would multiply this side over here by 4 also. Okay. So, in this case, it's pretty obvious because of the 12. But like I said, what if this were 7 or 8 or something like that, that I just can't look at it and say, well, if I multiply by an integer, I'm going to get this result. So what you would do is divide both sides by 12. And just to save some writing, I'm going to imagine that, I divided 12 and those canceled out. So I'm just going to have 1 inch over here. And I'm just going to leave this as 1/12 of a foot. Okay. And now I can do just as I did up above. I'm going to say, okay, well, now I'm going to multiply both sides by 48. So when I do that, multiplied by 48 on this side, then I am going to get what I want, which is 48 inches. And, if you would, let's just say you couldn't divide that in your head, you just, come over to your calculator here. I guess I'd have to get out of this. So, again, take 48 and divide it by 12. And there's my 4 over here. So I'll go back and just write that in there. So that's going to be 1/12 by 48 divided by 12 is going to be 4 feet. And I forgot my inches, so I just kind of, I guess I better erase it. I think you guys get the idea here. Okay. So that's what we could do. And of course, I'll just go ahead and verify those and, hit the solve button here. Okay, so there's my 20 weight, 7 yards is equal to 21 feet. And here's my 48 inches is equal to 4 feet. Okay, so that's just, one way of doing it. Now, the other thing that I can do is I could take these conversion equations here and write them as a ratio. Okay, and when I do that, and again, I'm taking long with this one example, but it doesn't matter what you're converting, what the units are, as long as you start with this equation. And I'll show you this actually in the next problem. You're going to kind of have to take this approach and work through it in the multi-step problem. So, so if I would start with this and I would just write and divide both sides by 1 foot, then I can write 1 is equal to 12 inches over 1 foot, or I can write 1 is equal to 1 foot divided by 12 inches. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just do that. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and I will write 1 equals 1 foot over 12 inches. This is hard to watch me do this. I messed around a little bit with my iPad. I'm sure there's a way, probably an easy way of doing it using the iPad, but splitting line here. Okay. Or I'm going to write 1 is equal to 12 inches over 1 foot. All right. And I'm going to do the same thing over here because I'll do both problems like this. So I'm going to write also that 1 is equal to 1 yard over 3 feet. I'm going to write a squiggly line here, and I'm also going to write that 1 is equal to 3 feet divided by 1 yard. Okay, so now I just wrote, took these equations and I wrote them or expressed them as 1 equal to some sort of ratio. Again, ratio just means a fraction. And what I'll do here now is I'll go and I'll look at this one here. And if I have 7 yards, right, and I want to transfer that to feet, if I would look at that and say, okay, well, I want to know what 7 yards is. So I'm going to kind of separate these just so it doesn't get too confusing. 7 yards, right? And if I look at that as a fraction, okay, I can kind of look at this as like over 1. And if I want the yards to divide out, it'd be left with feet, then I want the yards to be in the bottom. Okay, so remember, this is 1. So if I multiply by this ratio over here, it's just like multiplying by 1. I'm not changing this quantity at all. So what I'll do is I'll put I'll write the number 1 as 3 feet. Now, again, I'm doing this not to confuse you. I am doing this because the other type of problem, you're going to have to take this approach. It kind of forces you, and you'll see that in the next one here. Well, now the yards divide out. And so if I multiply straight across, I don't want it to get too um, hold on a second here. Okay, sorry about that. I had get this phone to my wife. Excuse me. Okay, so anyway, if I come over here, then obviously I'm going to be left with 21 feet. Okay, so you can see that I end up with the same thing that I did over here, up here, when I multiplied by, I just took that approach with the equality and then manipulated one side to what I wanted to get. Here, I just multiplied by the number 1 and the result's still the same. Okay, so I could do the same thing here for 48 inches. Okay, so I start off with this 48 inches. And if you don't want to write it as a fraction of 1, you don't have to. I mean, it's just, one way of approaching it. But think of it this way. I want to get inches out. So I want that to be in the denominator. Okay, I want to get inches out, and I want feet to be in the top. Okay, so that's kind of what you're, mentally going through here with this multiplication. And then you just come up here and choose the appropriate one, right? Where, in this case here, I want feet in the top in inches, so that's going to be a 1 and a 12. So I have 1 here and 12 here. Well, now, just again, how I multiply fractions, and maybe I'll go ahead here. And, we could just go ahead and take the top one, divide it by it, or do some sort of thing, use division, cancel things out. Actually, this goes in 12 one time and it's 4 times, but the inches divide out. And again, I'm left with just 4 feet, okay, which is what I ended up with over here, okay. So you can see that my solution over here is the same as over here. Kind of took a slightly different approach with this, looking at it as a ratio. But the key is I'm still using that equality. I'm just expressing these equalities as ratios over here, which is equal to the number 1. And I know it's 1 because they're both the same thing, right? So if I take, 5 divided by 5 or 7 divided by 7, 2 things that are equal, and divide them out, I'm not changing the quantity at all, okay? So that's that's what we say, that's the approach that you can take with this one. Now, if you, let me, there's a lot there. So, all right, so I'm going to clear all this out. And then I'm going to go and show you the type of problem here where you kind of have to take that approach, okay? And you could see that, here now we're going to actually do this, because we're working with Alex here. And I don't know why they didn't give you the calculator on the other one, but they are here. Probably because you had, just integer values here that always worked out easily. But now we're probably going to get some stuff that doesn't work out so well in terms of, integers. We might have some decimals and so forth. So, here's this, jogging track as, this particular length, how long is it in miles? So we just basically want to go from yards to miles, okay? So if I did write these out, now maybe just write out the 1 here, 1 mile equals 5,208 feet, okay? Notice that If I divide both sides by 1 mile, I'm going to get this one here, and that's just going to be equal to 1. Or if I divide both sides by 5,280 feet, I'm going to get this one over here, this ratio. Okay. So what I'm saying is all these ratios are equal to 1. So if I multiply this quantity by the number 1, I'm not going to change it. I'm just going to essentially be changing the units. And so what you'll have to do first is they're asking you to fill in this blank, and how you fill it in is just by dragging the appropriate one of these down. And so since we're going from yards to miles, we want the yards to cancel out. So that means we want the yards to be in the bottom, and this is the only one that has it, and we want miles to be in the top. So thankfully that's the one we need. So all we need to do is just drag this down here. Okay. And then, just like we said over here, we're multiplying fractions. So again, we're going to go straight across, and you see the yards cancel out. I'm just left with miles. So all I have to do is take 1,232 and multiply it by 1, and then divide it by 1,760. Okay. So in order to do that, I'll use this is a little easier to use than that calculator over there. So 1,232 divided by 1,760, and I get 0.7. Okay, so I'm just going to click here. I'll close that calculator, and I am just going to type in the number 0.7 from my keypad, and go ahead and do that. And instead of using the solve, I'll just use the check feature, and of course it's going to tell me that it's correct. Oh, yeah, this pops up. I'll probably forget this every time, but it's customary not to start the number with a decimal point. So in other words, they're asking me to type this in as 0.0, or I'm sorry, 0.7. Okay, but nonetheless, they're still going to give you credit for it. Okay, so that's how we use these customary, conversions. And just I showed you the other way. They're kind of forcing you the second way that I used or demonstrated to you there, or in that previous example. So that's why I presented it in 2 ways, to show you really you're just doing the same thing. I could go back and do this problem again with the 1 mile is equal to 1,760 yards, and then go ahead and get the just use the other technique I used first. That would work as well. Okay, but they're kind of forcing you to do it this way, so there's no sense in taking the other approach for these types of problems. All right. I think that's pretty much it, because really all these other conversions, you're going to go, through, these, switching over from units to units and so forth, and compound units and everything, and currency. And it's really going to be, kind of the same thing. I guess maybe I could do one of these here, word problem conversion between compound units. And, I guess these are kind of all word problems here. If I wipe this out and put all drawings. Okay. Here we're doing a rate. Yeah, this would be good for me to do because it's a little bit easier, but again, it's still the same. Okay. If I wrote these boxes out here, these are equal to 1, right? So in other words, 1 gallon is equal to 3.79 liters. I could write that as an equation or a ratio. And notice they have it in both ways because it is equal to 1. Now, I like this approach here, particularly when you're doing rates, because we're going from, and again, if somebody just read this to you and you didn't have all this here, your head probably would be spinning, in order to do this. But if you set this up in this systematic way, it's pretty simple, okay, when you really look at it. The idea is I want the rands, and I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it. I don't know, maybe with a South African accent, they say run or something like that. But then we have liters here. We want those to be gone, and we want to be left with dollars and gallons. all right? So, depending on which one, kind of look at it as like, okay, I want to get rid of the rands or runs or however they're expressed. So I want to get rid of that, but I want to replace it with the dollar. Okay. So I want the rand in the bottom and the dollars in the top. So this is my obvious choice here. I'm just going to drag that down. And then when I multiply, these are going to cancel out. And you're going to look at this as well, you are going to look at this as multiplying three fractions, right? But again, I'm multiplying by one here and one here. So I'm not changing this quantity. I'm just changing the units of measure for the rate. So we got the rands dividing out, the dollars in the top. We also want the liters to cancel out, and we want gallons in the bottom. So that means we want liters in the top of the one we choose so that it cancels that out, and we want gallons to remain in the bottom. So again, this is the obvious choice here because now the liters will cancel out and the gallons will be in the bottom. And so now all that remains is just, these units are all going to cancel out. As we said, rands cancel out, liters cancel out, and leaves us with dollars and gallons. So now all we have to do is just multiply straight across the top and straight across the bottom. Well, there's no sense of multiplying straight across the bottom on the calculator because 1 times 1 is 1, but we're going to divide it 1 into the product of all three of these numbers. And so if I just go ahead and take the 13.12 and I multiply by 0.074, and then if I go ahead and multiply by 3.79, I get my equals, I get 3.67. You say round to the nearest hundredth. Okay. So if I did that, that's going to be 3.68. So let me just use the solve, and there we have our 3.68. So sure enough, that works out. Okay. So, like I said, these are pretty much the same things over and over. Obviously, there are little nuances depending on, the measures and units and so forth. You can call them word problems because they're, phrased up here in a sentence or, maybe a little paragraph, but nonetheless, this work area down here is all the same on all of these. All right. So try to not extend this video any longer than it needs to be, but you can apply those concepts to all of these problems that we, again, are referring to here. Okay. So there you have it. Those are your conversions, and hopefully this helps you out in terms of saving you a little bit of time and fuss with these. They can be confusing, but if you apply some, these basic technique and method, it should make it a lot more manageable for you. All right, so until next week, God bless, and we will see you then.